Alcohol and Good Decisions by Orphaned Account on AO3. Episode 3, Chapter 3, To the Park, Part 2. When Shouta was young, he never would have imagined himself as a father, especially not with the example of his own father. And his mother's were godsends, really. Having raised Shouta from ages 10 with a combination of Mirko's fierce boisterousness and Yumi's quiet mildness, Shouta would never given up his mother's. Not for the world. And then entered Inko Midoriya. Inko was older than Shouta, out of high school and married, but still very young. She lived in the house next door, a stay-at-home wife, while her husband was out all hours of the day and night. And when his mothers asked the young woman to babysit Shouta while they were working, the 10-year-old only objected a small bit. Because one look at Inko told Shouta everything he needed to know. Inko was lonely, just like Shouta had been back before his mother's, drifting for 2 years through the foster system, and even before that, when hiding in closets and being locked in cellars took up the vast majority of his life. So only after a sideways glance from Yumi, Shouta grew quiet, because he knew that Inko needed him as much as he needed her. And so, Inko Midoriya became an older sister of sorts. She would watch Shouta while Yumi and Miracle were out working, and she would join them twice a week for dinners. That twice a week drifted down to once a week, after Inko got her evening job, of course, but she always continued to make time for Shouta and the Aizawas. Inko was there when Shouta entered high school, consoling him when he didn't pass UA's hero entrance exam with ice cream and a Studio Ghibli movie marathon. Then again, she comforted him when he was denied entry to the hero program through the Sports Festival. His second place when, not being enough to convince the school boards, a child with a villainous quirk could be a hero. And once more, Inko was there to celebrate with them when Shouta transferred over to Ketsubutsu, acing his hero exam with flying colors. And then, Inko became pregnant. It happened when Shouta was in his last year of high school, far too old for a babysitter but unwilling to pull away from his big sister. Inko came over one night, happy tears in her eyes, and handed over a small black and white photograph. "You see, Shou-Shou?" She teased him, sniffling and giggling. "You're gonna be an uncle." Shouta decided then and there that he would be the best uncle. He stated as much to Inko, who giggled again and ran a hand through his hair, long enough now to pull into a low bun, and subsequently be muscled up by Inko's gentle hands. It typically irritated Shouta to no end, but he relented that night, to win bliss by Inko's own joy. His mother's spoiled Inko, of course, but Shouta spent nearly every penny of his own allowance on gifts for the baby and for Inko. He bought Inko lotions and bath salts to help with her aches and pains, and he bought plushies, after teething rings, after blanket, after everything and anything for the baby. And when Inko found out it was a boy, Daizawas threw an entire party, even inviting Inko's friend Mitsuki and her husband Masaru, their newborn baby of their own, Katsuki, in tow. It had been a good night, Shouta remembered, full of joy and laughter. It was one of Shouta's best memories of Inko, one of the people he was most fond of in life. And when Izuku Midoriya was born, small and underweight, but ultimately healthy, Shouta found a new tiny being to be fond of. Izuku was adorable, all pink skin, button nose, and 20 tiny fingers and toes. Shouta hardly put him down. Even when Shouta graduated high school and moved away to go to university, he would return home every weekend to visit his mother's, Inko, and most importantly now, Izuku. Even for all that he was still small, Izuku grew like a weed. Before Shouta knew it, the freckled baby was crawling and babbling and driving Inko crazy. On top of being cute, Izuku was so incredibly bright. The baby was always laughing, always smiling, always being cheery and treating his Uncle Sho to a gummy grin. It made Shota slowly, gradually, begin to reconsider his swearing off children. It was when Izuku was about a year old that Inko began to grow quieter. She withdrew, only a little at first, pushing their weekly dinners to every other week, and then once a month, and then none at all. Despite this, Inko would never begrudge Shota of his time with Izuku. Dutifully, every weekend, Inko would drop Izuku off with his uncle and honorary grandmothers, returning to her house to have some quality time with her husband. Shota often wondered if Izuku hadn't been in his life, if school hadn't distracted him, would things have turned out differently? Would Shota still be Izuku's dear uncle, and not his beloved father? Would Inko still be alive? Because it was during one of those weekends Shota was visiting and watching Izuku that the Midoriya house was set ablaze. Upon the first scent of smoke and the sound of the fire alarm going off next door, Shota was handing Izuku off to his mother's. The baby began to whine at Shota's sudden disappearance. Out the door the hero rushed, grasping his capture scarf as he entered the cracked door of his neighbor's house. The flames were already consuming the kitchen and living area and were creeping up the steps that Shota rushed up, entering the master bedroom without pause. Inko's body was lying on the ground, the carpet around her untouched by flames, and yet she was shriveled up and blackened, burnt to an utter crisp. The smell of burnt flesh had made Shota gag and throw up on his own feet when everything hit him. Isashi Midoriya had a fire quirk, and he was nowhere to be seen. The police and emergency services have arrived shortly thereafter, and the Aizawa household was hardly even touched by the flames. The Midori house, however, was burnt to the ground. The fire, starting at the base of the house, had caused it to collapse, and Shota had barely escaped with his life. He hadn't been able to touch Inko's body, much less carry it outside. She didn't even get a proper burial, and it was Isashi Midoriya's fault. For a long time, Shota was angry, downright furious. He poured everything he had into finding Isashi Midoriya and putting him behind bars. But even succeeding in that hadn't been enough. He ripped into villains like a madman, putting them in hospitals rather than prisons. Tsukalchi, a recently somewhat friend of his, had tried to talk him down, but ultimately it was his mother's that got to him. What do you think this will do to Izuku in the long run? Michiko had been uncharacteristically quiet. You know that we love Izuku, and we love fostering him, but Inko's will requested that you raise him. We're old, Shota. Yumi had spoken, softer to her son, but with no less severity. We're old, and Izuku needs someone he could count on. Someone he could count on to come home to him after a long patrol. Can you be the one that offers that to him? Or will you lose him forever? In the end, there was no question about it. Shota would rather die than lose Izuku. Or, rather, Shota would live for Izuku. And so, he became a father. Shota settled down, as much as one could settle with a newly turned 2-year-old, and finished getting his degree in law and ethics. He grew closer with Emi Fukukado, growing a friendship with her and a relationship reminiscent of his with Inko. Emi was a little sister to Shota, and a wonderful auntie joke to Izuku. And then, when Izuku turned 4, he was diagnosed as quirkless. Shota hated that word. Diagnosed. Not quirkless, No, there was nothing wrong with being quirkless. Shota fought quirkless himself, relying on his strength in hand to hand combat rather than a flashy quirk. But calling Izuku's quirklessness diagnosable was horrid. There was nothing inherently wrong with Shota's son just because he didn't have a goddamn quirk. But other people didn't see it that way. God, how Shota had been blind to quirkless discrimination and hatred before he had a quirkless son. But now, Shota would no longer be blind. He raised Izuku the best he could, cutting ties with the Bakugos when Katsuki became utterly violent against Izuku. He moved Izuku's schools until he found one that was not only accepting, but also fostered and raised the quirkless children's knowledge. Yes, Shota wanted to see his son grow. He wanted to see Izuku grow up happy and healthy. And now, watching Izuku's face crumble at Yamada's question, Shota wondered if he really saved his son from a painful life, if he had done enough to help save Izuku from the painful and discrimination and the horridness of people, if he'd done good enough to help the most important person in his life. Shota could only hope. As soon as the words left Isashi's mouth, he wished he could take them back, because Izuku looked absolutely crushed. And Isashi was immediately reminded that the world was cruel, a cruel place. He himself was a product of it, after all. From birth, he had his quirk. It had deafened his parents, the doctor, and himself upon first cry, earning him a place in an orphanage very, very young. Much of Hisashi's childhood was repressed, and he's absolutely didn't remember anything before his first 5 years of life, which was probably for the best. He was honestly surprised when he was still alive with what happened in the following years. But there was a few things that stuck out to him. Being swatted with yardsticks by his teacher in class when his voice rose too loud, being made fun of by other kids for being too much and yet not enough, being told he'd never be adoptive if he couldn't keep his mouth shut, being muzzled and locked in a cellar for days on end. That was the worst memory, of course. Isashi still had the scars to show for it whenever he shaved. The puckering breath, his chin from where the metal had cut too deeply into his skin when he tried to speak, tried to cry, tried to breathe. And true to what his caretakers had told him would happen, Hisashi was never adopted. He aged out of the system and upon entering college, took refuge surfing couches. The Idas were particularly kind, allowing Hisashi to stay with them for nearly an entire year before Tensei graduated ahead of Hisashi and ended up moving out himself. They insisted Hisashi was always welcome, but something about Tensei no longer living under the same roof made Hisashi feel like he was taking advantage. He was still in school, though, and the dorms were expensive as hell. He'd been complaining about it to Nomuri at the teacher's lounge of UA during their 10 years as teaching assistants there. I mean, I only have a few more months left, anyways, and then I'd be able to afford an apartment myself, but until then, He looked down. I'm not sure what I'll do. Nomuri looked distraught, reaching out to squeeze her friend's shoulder. If she hadn't been staying at the dorms herself, she would have offered him a place to stay, and yet she couldn't. But Hisashi wouldn't have asked that of her anyways. Nomuri and Tensei had already done so much for Hisashi. They kept him alive through high school, bringing him lunches, when his caretakers forgot to fill the fridges and give him rides to and from his supposed home. They kept him alive in other ways as well, in midnight phone calls, and in skipping classes. Eyes were always full of tears, lungs too full of pain, hurt, painful sorrow. to be able to breathe. They kept him alive and safe, and they helped him start to heal. It was at that opportune moment, that time of weakness for Hisashi, that an angel appeared. Or rather, a not rat, not bear, maybe a stork, if you would. None other than Hisashi's homeroom teacher, recently promoted to school principal, dropped down through a vent in the ceiling. Only years of training kept Hisashi from screeching out of the window of the teacher's lounge. Ah, Yamada-kun, I have been made aware that you need a place to stay. No? Nomori snorted. Made aware? Uh, I'll be fine, Nezu-sensei. Hisashi corkled back, putting on airs for his old teacher. Please don't worry about anything. I'll be just fine. Yamada-kun, I have long since been thinking about installing a small dormitory on campus for students in need. It is something that should have been done years ago. The silent, something I wish I could have done for you, nearly brought tears to Hisashi's eyes. At last, I have no volunteers within my staff for a den mother of sorts. Would you be interested in striking a deal to assist me, Yamada-kun? Sure, Nezu-sensei, came Hisashi's immediate reply, his voice cracking. That sounds nice. And so, for the rest of his time in university, Hisashi lived on UA's campus. There were only ever 2 students who needed a place to stay at the dorm, and only temporary for both. But Hisashi stayed on campus all the same, offering after-school tutoring and training sessions for students before retiring to his small, apartment-like room at the base of the dorm. Even after moving out, finding his own apartment, and earning his own living, Hisashi still returned to the dorm whenever temporary occupants passed through. It was one way that the man tried to pay his old teacher back, because Hisashi had never been able to thank Nezu properly for helping him. He tried to offer up a check to the maybe stork at one point in time, but Nezu had flat out refused him. It was only after months and months of trying that Nezu finally sat Hisashi down and said, You want to repay me, Yamada-kun? Very well. Come and teach at UA. And so, all was well that ended well. Hisashi had a job, and a home, and a family with Tensei Nomori and the UA staff and Nezu. It was more that he could ask for. So, yes, Hisashi knew of the world's cruelties. But he also knew of the world's lights, the sunshine and the happiness and the laughter, and he could see that light inside of his little Izuku. Could see it trying its best to burn bright. But seeing the light, as it were, meant that Hisashi could see the very moment his words snuffed it out. No, not snuffed it out. The light was still there, just dimmed, hidden behind protective hands, hands that were trying to keep it from dying. Izuku was shielding his light, and Hisashi had a duty to help the boy, a duty brought on by being the one who put up that wall, a duty brought on by being a teacher and a mentor, a duty brought on because he was here. He was here and in the presence of such a bright, luminescent child who just needed a little push. Uh, I, I... Izuku stuttered, staring down at his little hands where they were wiggling at each other. Aizawa's own hand snuck forward, allowing itself to be used as a fidget for the child's nervousness. I don't have one. Izuku mumbled, the words barely caught by Hisashi's hearing aids. Oh, sweetheart. Hisashi wanted to cry, because the world may have been kind to him because of his quirk, but the world was downright cruel to the quirkless. Hisashi stilled, in his light swearing, pulling himself off of his swing set and crouching down in front of Izuku. Next to him, Aizawa tensed up, looking ready for a fight to break out. It almost would have made Hisashi laugh, had he not been so focused on the little boy in front of him. What should he say next? He had been quiet for too long already. What could he say? Sorry was out of the question and rude. And that sucks was downright offensive, even if it was true. And so, Hisashi said what came naturally. Wow, little listener, you're so flipped and cool. The enthusiastic reply made Izuku jump, and his eye flicker up to Hisashi. His tears shocked away. Behind Hisashi, Aizawa was completely still, even as his hand in Izuku's shook minutely. What? Izuku choked, looking downright astonished. Yeah, you're a certified badass, little dude. Hisashi replied again, doing his best to sound natural and excited, both at once. Poor little Izuku just looked confused, and Hisashi leapt to explain. Look, kiddo, a lot of people in the world have quirks, right? Yeah? So, statistically speaking, not having a quirk is rare, right? Slowly, still not following Hisashi's logic, Izuku nodded. Okay, so little listener, not having a quirk makes you special. It means you have something not a lot of people have. Yeah? Something about Hisashi's reasoning must have hit the child then, because Izuku's eyes lit up even as the rest of his body was still hesitant. Slowly but surely, those hands were retreating from around the light within the boy. Yeah, Izuku chirped back. I'm special, right, Daddy? Hisashi could have melted from the tone of voice that skewed from Aizawa's mouth, full of warmth and softness and utter adoration. Aizawa spoke to his son. Yes, Izuku, you are very special, especially to me. And then Izuku's tears were replaced with giggles, bright, melodic giggles that sent a wave of relief washing over Hisashi. He sat back on his haunches, grinning ear to ear, as Izuku, still holding his father's hand hostage to his chest, began a tangent about all the facts he knew about quirkless people, as well as mentioning some of the older quirkless people he had met and made friends with. And well, it could have been much, much worse, to say the very least. This, this blonde fucking bastard. How dare he be good with Shota's child? How dare he not be a quirkus piece of shit and actually a decent human being? How dare he laugh and be a ray of utter fucking sunshine as he giggled along with Shota's son? Shota wanted to jump his fucking bones. Reeling in that feeling, Shota quickly assessed the situation. Izuku was no longer crying or looked crushed. In fact, he was utterly gleeful as he told Yamada about the baker down the street from their apartment who was quirkless and made the best chocolate croissants. Yamada was nodding along, laughing, and cooling and grinning at all the right places. Shota felt like a boss in a video game, one that was getting all of his weak points hit one by this utter fucking asshole of an angel. Sure, not being quirkist was a plus, and a big one at that. But Yamada was so much more than not quirkist. On a surface level, he was attractive, sure. Still in his cubbing clothes, but managing to pull off a casual face and countenance that put Shota and Izuku at ease. Not to forget, the man was funny. Shota had a reputation to uphold, so he didn't laugh, but Yamada was funny. Much funnier than M. Although Shota would take that sentiment to his grave. Yamada was a social butterfly, so kind and so thoughtful. The back of Shota's mind was almost bitter about that, wondering if Izuku would have been better off with someone more like Yamada. But he cut that train of thought as soon as possible. His therapist would disapprove. Shota wanted to get to know Yamada more and more. If you're so excited about Tanaka-san's croissants, Shota drawled, gaining the attention of his son and, not a crush, Shota told the little Emmy that lived inside his brain, Yamada, why don't we go get some? Izuku squealed, stomping his little feet in place. Croissants and ice cream? Shouta winced, but he didn't want to put any kind of damper on his kid's day. Not when it was going so well. One scoop, Izuku. And then Izuku was turning back to Yamada, squealing. What kind of ice cream do you like, Mr. Yamada-san? Before Yamada could reply, Shouta was standing and scooping up his child off the ground, playfully holding Izuku's knees tightly as he swung the little boy upside down. Izuku shrieked with mirthfulness giggles, and Shouta couldn't help but smile. Well, Yamada? Shouta said out loud, finding himself in this curious situation once again, of asking his one-night stand to have a playdate with him and his son. Are you coming? Fuck. Hisashi's brain was stuck like a broken record, because that smile, he could die. He could die happy right here and now, because even if Izuku's giggles were cute, they tied right up there with Aizawa's gentle little smile as he played with his son. Swinging Izuku upside down, Aizawa tickled the boy's stomach as his shirt rose down, and Izuku shrieked at a volume that could put Hisashi to shame. But then Aizawa was turning him, asking if he was coming with them to get ice cream and croissants. How could Hisashi say something but a loud and enthusiastic, "Of course"? Aizawa's smile briefly widened before he was turning around, swinging Izuku to sit up on his hip. And fuck, Hisashi was so screwed. We haven't even moved on from day one. Day one. I'll say it day one. Yay, it's sunshines and rainbows out of our asses again. Izuku's happy, Hisashi and Shouta are pining, and we're about to get into more backstory in the next chapter. I do like that Shouta and Iko we're not dating. Thank God. Somebody else made me realize, because I was talking to them about this fanfiction, that the timelines don't match. And that's another thing I was low-key worried about, but I didn't realize how unmatchy would unmatch. And I was like, ugh, no. But I do like the whole pseudo big sister. Love that. Oh my god. But yeah. If all goes according to plan, the next chapter will talk about UA, Ketsubutsu, and the name Eraserhead just as a teaser. Thanks so long for reading, and I appreciate all of you guys so much. Okay. Alright. Okay, next chapter is called, is it gonna be Chocolates and Croissant? The calm before. No! Why? What's the next chapter after that? The storm! Why? This isn't very plus ultra of you. Whoever you are, sleep with one eye open. As always, my raindrops, make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds. Have a wonderful night or day. Link to my Discord server and socials are down in the description, and subscribe to see more of my content.